Head of Tax at Liaison. Been involved with VAT for around 25 years. Previously, I worked for HMRC and currently work for Liaison and Head of Tax. Also joined by Jack Mazzina. He's an expert on workforce and he's our Business Development Director. So some very high level professionals who will be doing the webinar today. So moving on to the specific agenda areas, we'll be having Jack speaking, then myself. So we're the two who will be doing the talking today. We'll be looking at our NHS workforce experience. Then I'm going to look at locum supplied as an exempt medical service model and compare that against the fixed term engagement service governed by IR35 employment tax in the NHS, and specifically looking at the changes that were made by HMRC in February. Jack's going to come on and he'll be talking about managing the four main stakeholders, primarily the workers, the agencies, our NHS organisations and HMRC, and then we'll take the questions. If you do have any questions as we go through, like I said, please type them in your section there. Now, Liaison, as a company, we've been providing the NHS with VAT consultancy and workforce management services, and that's been for the last 30 years. And we're delivering more than £100 million worth of savings each year to the NHS. So we're talking big amounts of money here. We're proud of this heritage that we have in delivering the NHS VAT advice, and that's been over the last 30 years. In the last 8 years, we've been delivering workforce management services, and again, this is a very resilient part of our business area. Again, Liaison have been pioneers and innovators, and the term direct engagement first arose around 2011. And we're now supporting the NHS towards wider workforce effectiveness services. The services evolved quite substantially to manage engagement of workers, and that's through either internal banks, collaborative banks, and that's through a proven delivery model using innovative technology, specific back office services, data warehousing and reporting services, along with specialist support. And we delivered the first medical collaborative bank to the NHS. So again, the service is constantly evolving and meeting the needs of the NHS. Presently, we've got 63 live trust and health boards using Liaison's workforce management service, and they're based across the whole of the UK. So, the terminology is quite important here, and the term direct engagement. And just looking at what we mean by this, this is describing the process where the NHS organisations basically enter into a fixed term contract with the workers who are sourced and vetted through the agencies. Now, other providers have entered into this market and they've used different worker engagement models, and this is where the issue has been with HMRC in February. And this webinar aims to look at the differences between the services provided and the impact of HMRC's most recent ruling. So, we've been delivering NHS VAT services for 30 years, and today our experts will provide our technical opinion on the tax treatment of the contingent workforce. So, the recent HMRC activity came into effect from the 1st of February 2019, and this is where they were looking at where a supplier claimed to be providing an exempt healthcare services. No VAT was charged from the supplier, and there was no VAT to recover by the NHS. The change is that HMRC have disagreed and issued a ruling that the service is not actually a healthcare service. It still is a supply of staff. Now, this is an immediate cost pressure and an immediate potential issue. HMRC have not indicated any retrospective action yet, and there's 45 NHS organisations who have been involved with this ruling. So, looking at the ruling, there are tax implications on each service offering. So there's two tax rulings that come into play here. The first one is that the supply of healthcare services are exempt from VAT. Now, this is where the control and direction remains with the supplier. They will not charge VAT because it's an exempt healthcare services, and there's no VAT for the NHS to recover. However, if it's deemed to be a supply of staff and the control and direction leaves the supplier, this is a supply of staff and VAT will be charged at 20%. This VAT is non-recoverable by the NHS, so it's an additional cost. Now, locums or other medical healthcare professionals supplied via this company are under the control and direction of the NHS. The supply of staff attracts standard rated VAT. This VAT is non-recoverable by the NHS, and HMRC can take retrospective action, and again it's highly likely that that's the route that they will go down. So this is a major risk to the NHS. They just have to be aware that if VAT has not been charged on what the supplier has deemed to be an exempt medical service, that following HMRC's ruling from the 1st of February, HMRC can take retrospective action. Basically what HMRC are saying, VAT should have been charged, VAT would have been non-recoverable, and for the length of the contract, we can take retrospective action. Now, most typically that would be restricted to 4 years from the date of HMRC's decision. So, moving on, we'll look at how engaging workers on fixed-term contracts is subject to IR35 employment tax rules. And it's fairly straightforward because employment's completely out with the scope of VAT. VAT's disregarded. It falls under employment tax and pension rules. So there's absolutely no risk. There's no issues here. VAT is completely disregarded where we're using employment rather than either a supply of services or a supply of staff. So, moving on, I'm going to hand over to Jack, and he's going to take us through the temporary workforce management.
Thanks very much, Kenny. So moving on, we're going to examine from our experience of delivering workforce management services to the NHS for the past 8 years, and to deliver an effective service, we've got to carefully consider and manage 4 key stakeholders. So we're going to look at those stakeholders and talk about the parts of the service that are relevant to them and affect them. So we're going to kick off with the first stakeholder, and that is, of course, the workers in this. And it's important to reference that last year, through providing Liaison's workforce management services across the NHS, over 11,000 workers were engaged on fixed-term contracts by Liaison's NHS clients for direct engagement. And of the 11,000 workers, 99% of those workers contracted on a PAYE basis. Therefore, they were on a fixed-term employment contract with the NHS for the period they were required. Obviously, where workers are employed by the NHS, as well as the tax rules, pension rules are also applicable. So of that workforce population, we saw around 25% of the population were eligible and enrolled into the NHS pension scheme, and around 5% of the workforce that were not eligible for the NHS scheme ended up staying in and didn't opt out of the net pension scheme and stayed enrolled there. But when it comes to connecting the NHS with their temporary workforce and making it easy for them to contract, there's a number of key things that we need to examine. The first being, obviously, it's having the provision. The NHS needs to have the provision of an accessible and user-friendly technology platform, and that enables workers to communicate their availability to take up shifts. It allows them to accept those shifts, and it enables them to sign their contract to make their pensions choices, as well as submitting timesheets. And it's really important that they've got access to that. It's easy to use, and that improves their user experience. Additionally, most important of all to any worker, of course, is being able to get paid and having a provision of a reliable weekly payroll service where it's clear they know when they're going to get paid, and they've got access to pay slips. They're easy to understand, and it's been able to get paid on a true weekly basis. So we've seen some providers out there that don't necessarily operate a true weekly service whereby a timesheet from a previous week can be submitted, it can be authorised, and there's a really robust process to make sure that that is cleared in time to run a weekly payroll by the end of the following week, so you can get paid for the shifts you've done last week and this week. Additionally, for workers, obviously, it's around having a fair pay rate, and that's a pay rate that's inclusive of benefits for a fixed-term worker. And we tend to find that isn't a particular issue when it comes to workers sourced by agencies, because as we see, they're often earning either twice or three times the rate of substantive staff. Mentioned timesheets already. It's really important for workers to have an easy and accessible timesheet process, so they can submit an electronic timesheet and they can see the status of that timesheet. They can see who's required to sign it off, and they can chase that individual up. For workers, it's really important to have support when engaging with fixed-term contracts with the NHS. So that could be, where they might have a question around their timesheet, how to use the system, what their payslip means, understanding their pensions implications. So it's about provision of a help desk that's accessible for workers, where they can, if they've got any queries, they can get answers to them in a quick way, on a rapid basis. And finally, we talked about the pension scheme before. For a worker where they're eligible to join a pension scheme, and as we've seen from the stats there, around a quarter of the contingent workforce out there actually see enrolling into the NHS pension scheme as a benefit to them. So it's about making sure that their organisation they're contracting with has that service provision there for them. Moving on, we're next going to examine the agency supply chain, which of course are really important in this process because they source the candidates and connect them with the hospitals where they'll be working. And as we said, the agencies play the role in this, where they no longer employ the worker anymore, but their role is now as more of a recruiter, where they source and vet the candidates and introduce them for the NHS to the NHS for a fixed-term engagement. And in this space, Liaison has support where we're working with over 200 agencies to supply through direct engagement through both our temporary and staff flow systems. And you'll note that for the agencies, a number of the key factors in this are the same for the workers, because happy workers means happy agencies, and they know that they can provide their service and get paid quickly and keep their workers happy. And so for the agencies, it's about having that same user-friendly, accessible technology platform where they can access the vacancies being released by organisations, and they can submit their candidates back through there. They can see their timesheets, they can understand what commission payments are owed. It's about having that reliable weekly payroll service. So where Liaison provides a weekly payroll service for fixed-term workers, agencies want to know that their workers are going to get paid on time. They've got that robust timesheet process. So if they submit a timesheet one week, they know they can get paid the next week, and it's a reliable and accurate payroll provision. Liaison provides a agency commission disbursement service. So it tends to streamline the authorization process where we have a technology platform capturing vacancies, bookings, timesheets in a tracks process. And we can then calculate the commission payments owed to the agencies, and on a monthly basis we can collect the money from the NHS and transfer that to the agencies to make sure that they get paid on in a relatively short period of time, and they're not having to issue an invoice and chase that invoice for payment. Additionally, within this process, agencies need support. So it's providing that same help desk support access for the agencies. So where they might have queries about the technology platform, uploading workers, asking queries about timesheets, setting up disbursement service, it's really important to have that support provision there for the agencies to enable a smooth process. And from Liaison's perspective, we're here to help facilitate strong partnership working between our mutual NHS clients. So it's around enabling the NHS to access their agency supply chain and get best value, and ultimately get the workers so they can deliver better patient safety. Moving on to the next stakeholder, which of course is the NHS in this. So when the NHS is looking for a robust temporary workforce management service, and there's a number of key things that are important to them. And the first one being is that when they are sourcing workers via agencies, for them it's around having control of pay rates and visibility, and of what's being paid to the worker, what's being paid to the agencies for their commission, and having that level of control. The NHS often buys their workers via agencies via a framework, so it's making sure that their framework rate cards are loaded into the system, and we can vet rates submitted against that rate card. And the NHS might be working to, in England, for example, the NHS ICAP, or we find a number of NHS organisations, health boards, for example, maybe working to a different, striving to work to a different cap, where they don't want to exceed a certain level of pay for workers. So we can help them control that process and have visibility, build things into the technology like rate blockers and flags to show where they might be breaching a rate that they've pre-agreed to pay. For the NHS, of course, again, it's a consistent theme. They need an innovative end-to-end technology platform and a mobile worker app, so they can manage the end-to-end process on there, right from identifying they have a vacancy to fill through to releasing that to their supply chain, whether that be to their bank, an external collaborative bank, or their agencies. It's been able to release that through one system and have the mobile worker app to connect workers to those shifts. For the NHS, and particularly when it comes to fixed term engagement, it's really important to have robust worker contracts and access to legal support. If you're going to engage with a worker on a fixed term contract, that's where Liaison will provide a template contract, a template that has been currently being used by over 60 NHS organisations. It's approved by CAPSTICS, and they act as our legal partner in this. And for the NHS, it's about having that real clear contractual arrangement between the NHS organisation and their worker for the period booked. For the NHS as well, if you're employing these staff, of course, they need to be able to pay those workers and make sure where pensions are applicable that they're managed compliantly. So with Liaison service, we provide an outsourced, well, it's an in-house payroll run by Liaison, which the NHS outsources to us for their fixed term workers, and they get assurance that their workers are being paid weekly, where the pay is subject to IR35, so tax where applicable is deducted at source, and that where workers are eligible and enrol into the pension scheme, and that is managed on their behalf by our robust and award-winning payroll service. Obviously, one of the main themes of this webinar is around compliance, and it's really important for the NHS that they are in line with HMRC legislation, whether that be for employment taxes and IR35, but actually around VAT legislation, and making sure that that there's a really clear definition of how these workers are being engaged. on the theme of HMRC, we'll examine the last stakeholder in this, which is HMRC. And they became first aware of the term direct engagement and the service that Liaison introduced to the NHS in around 2011-12. And they had cited the service and the fact that workers were going to be engaged on fixed term employment contracts right from the beginning, and they approved and agreed that that the service was in line with legislation and the tax treatment was correct at the point of inception. It's subsequently been thoroughly reviewed back in 2014, and that resulted in no challenge, and that was where HMRC came on site to an NHS client, and they had a thorough look at the way the process works there, how they were releasing contracts to workers, how they were booking them, the shift patterns. They also came to Liaison's service centre, where the payroll service provision is run from, the back office function, and had a thorough look at that. But it's fair to say since 2014, HMRC have routinely observed this type of service in operation through their general HMRC visits to NHS organisations. Fundamentally, true direct engagement, where workers are engaged on fixed term contracts, it's something that the NHS has always done. The NHS has always engaged with workers for fixed term periods, so it's nothing new. It's just a different way and a more cost-effective way of engaging your temporary workforce. And it's the same where agencies are involved as well. The NHS has always used recruiters, external agencies, to source and vet candidates and introduce them to work at their organisation. For HMRC, it's really important with things like the loan charge, some of the, it's fair to say, dodgy umbrella arrangements that have been out there in the NHS of late, that they are really clear that they want the NHS to have transparent and clear worker engagement, so they can see their workers' tax status, and ultimately responsibility will fall back on the NHS for determining is their workforce paying the right amount of tax. And that covers the IR35 compliance. It's really important, and from April this year, the NHS could become liable for any workers that they haven't done the appropriate checks on to make sure that they're paying the right amount of tax on their earnings. So moving on, just to talk a bit more around how the investment Liaison has made in building a quality service to support managing these stakeholders. And that starts with, we talked a lot today about the technology and the worker experience, but actually for the NHS, when using a type of service like this, it's really important that they've got visibility of their data and they get management information in order to make decisions. So that's where Liaison has made a huge investment in developing an NHS data warehouse and reporting services team of 15 staff, and they're dedicated to supporting the reporting needs of our clients. We provide both regional and national benchmarking, so organisations have got visibility of market behaviour. What is the going rate by grade and specialty for this particular member of staff? We've invested in delivering a really innovative technology roadmap. So beyond providing that end-to-end process, but looking into the future around how we can use things like artificial intelligence from a data warehouse of over 5 million different bank and agency bookings. We can start to look at what good bookings look like, what bad bookings look like, and how can we use and teach our technology to coach the users on how they make the best, how can they make a better booking? Are they about to pay more than what the going rate is for a particular member of staff? There's other things in there around, can we build things like digital assistants to do out-of-hours support, and use of conversational chat box like the obviously Amazon Alexa devices and the Google Pebble device. We know in the NHS that the provision of a technology solution isn't going to solve all the problems. So what's really important is about backing that up with specialist staff support. And that's where Liaison has one of the largest teams in this space supporting our NHS clients, and that's everything from an account management team and providing strategic oversight and management, right through to our on-the-ground client service team who are training NHS staff on how to use our systems, redesign processes. They link in with the NHS workforce, they link in with agencies. They're supported by a full-time agency engagement team So we've got a particular individual who's been part of the agency world for over 25 years, now working for Liaison and helping agency manage those agency relationships between the agency supply chain and our NHS clients, and making sure they've got access to the systems. We get feedback from them, and making sure that they support our clients. And we talked about it a lot today. It's about having that service centre, so payroll and help desk provision. We've got a team of over 60 staff based in our Worcester office who provide specialist support for both workers, agencies and NHS staff throughout this process. Liaison takes pride in taking a real proactive approach to supporting NHS requirements and the NHS direction. So where we started with the NHS in helping them manage the agency staff process, our solution has since evolved to help the NHS build internal banks. We know there's a huge need for collaborative bank in the NHS, so we're looking to how can our solution support that direction. And moving on from there, that as well as managing the temporary staffing process, how can we help the NHS clients compare that to substantive? So can we bring in information from the substantive workforce and start to look at the true root causes for demand? How staff are scheduled, through their rostering optimization, and of course things like recruitment and retention staff benefits, which of course, if they get those things right, the need for temporary staffing is reduced and costs are reduced. And underpinning everything Liaison does is we use our legal partner Capsticks to make sure all the services we provide are in line with legislation, and we're not exposing any of our clients to unnecessary risks. So I think that concludes the webinar for today, but we're now going to, I think we've had a few questions come through during there, so we're now going to take a few minutes to answer some questions, and if there are any questions that you haven't thought of, please send them across now.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Yeah, there's been quite a few questions came through this morning. So the first one is, I think this is for you. Can a worker choose between an NHS or a Nest pension?
Okay, yeah, so when during this process, when an NHS worker is obviously going to enter into a direct contract for employment for that period, it's not necessarily that they have a choice, it's around their eligibility. So every worker, they'll be first assessed for eligibility for the NHS pension scheme. And if they're eligible, they are enrolled into that scheme, and they can decide to opt out if they don't wish to do that, because it does have an effect on their pay rate, because these workers are already paid at a much higher rate than substantive staff to compensate them for the fact they don't have a pension scheme when they're employed by an agency, but when they choose to become employed by the NHS, the pension deductions come out of their total rate, so it's not an additional cost to the NHS. There are workers out there that might not be eligible to join the NHS scheme, so they might have used up their pensionable allowance, so they will then be assessed for eligibility for the Nest pension scheme, and they'll be also enrolled into that scheme again until they opt out. And as we said earlier, there's around 25% of workers out there tend to opt into the NHS scheme, and the Nest scheme is around 5% of workers.
Okay, thanks, Jack. This question's come up from a few people. So do Liaison have approval from HMRC in writing with their current system?
Yes, so going back to 2011, when this service was introduced to the NHS, that's when it was first taken to HMRC and presented. And it's fair to say, I don't think HMRC issue approval letters, but what we've got is as good as that. And obviously we have that letter from HMRC, which runs through our service provision, the tax implications of that, and it confirms that the arrangements of Liaison service are in line with tax legislation and therefore outside the scope of VAT.
Okay, thanks very much. Next one is, do agencies have to pay VAT on the workers supplied? So I'll take this question. So I'm
Sure.
presuming this is meaning from the agencies to the NHS. So under the workforce agreement, the agencies will they'll source and vet the candidates and then introduce them to the NHS for the fixed term engagement. Now, the agencies will charge an early commission rate for the recruitment service, and that will attract VAT at standard rate at 20%. So VAT will be charged from the agencies to the NHS. However, the difference here is that this is not a cost to the NHS. The NHS have scope to recover this VAT under the CAUSE rules. It's heading 57. There's a specific code that's been set up so that it's not a cost for the NHS. Okay, so the next question. So this is probably for you, Jack. Does the system enable the introduction of hierarchical approval of rates submitted by agencies above agreed local NHS ceiling?
Okay. Well, the short answer to that is yes. So when using Liaison's temporary workforce management systems, when a vacancy is loaded on to the platform, and yeah, that can go for approval to a particular hierarchy. So that can be approved before the vacancy is released to the supply chain to say, well, this is a requirement we have. Do we actually need this requirement? So that can be set up by the system. And then once a worker is submitted and goes for booking, if that worker needs, if the rate is above the, an NHSI cap or a local agreed NHS ceiling, and that's where, again, that worker can be submitted for approval before making the booking and confirming that and committing to the cost. So we can do that through the technology. And additionally, what's really important is for our clients is being able to report on it as well. So looking at all the bookings you've made, what proportion of the workers booked were below ceiling rates or caps, and what proportion were above, and we can start to look at trends and is there particular grades and specialties that consistently breach pre-agreed rates, and that's a really invaluable service we find working with the NHS to better control that.
Okay, and the next question's along the same sort of line. Does the system have the ability to lock agency commission rates?
Okay, yes, again, it does. So it's at the point of implementing a system like this within the NHS. One thing that Liaison will do is obviously examine rate cards. So if a trust or health board is buying their agency staff through a particular framework, we'll look to incorporate the framework rate card into the system, the platform. And there's two functionalities within there, two bits of functionality. We can just have it so it flags where commission is breached, or a number of our NHS clients actually like to switch on the commission blockers. So where there is a contracted commission rate agreed with their agency supply chain, there's no reason why that should be breached when it's on a framework. So they can actually block candidates being submitted at a commission rate that's higher than what's in the pre-agreed framework.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Next question again for you. So 25% legible or 25% enrolled onto the pension scheme?
Okay, so yes, of the 25%, that is 25% that were actually enrolled. So 11,000 workers, there was just over 2,500 actually enrolled into the NHS pension scheme when being directly engaged by their organisations. I'm not sure we have a stat. We hear, I think, of the locum population out there, workers who are being sourced by agencies, it tends to be around, it's at least half or up to 60% of the workers are, they might be already employed somewhere else in the NHS. So if they're employed in the NHS and they haven't used up their pension allowance, they'll be eligible for the pension. But we don't have the exact stat on how many are eligible. So it tends to be, it depends on, we don't have sight of that when we're booking workers.
Okay, thanks, Jack. Next question. What probability percent do you think as to whether the HMRC will raise a retrospective assessment of the Brooks and Plus Us? So I'll take that one. So HMRC are highly likely to raise an assessment. There would have to be an overriding factor for them not to raise an assessment. Otherwise, they will be setting a precedent. And specifically, the question has been asked by the delegate on Brooks and Plus Us. What I will say is there's another supplier, and the assessment has gone out on that. That assessment went back to the start of the contract. That was like 3 years ago. HMRC can go back 4 years. If they are saying that VAT is due, then the logic and the normal for them is to raise an assessment on it. And if they don't raise an assessment, there would have to be some overriding factor for there not to be an assessment being raised.
And I think, Kenny, just to clarify, because my understanding of that, and I was just going to check with you, is that this this is a HMRC rule and it's not a rule change. So if there was a change in the rules, they may not go back because it's saying from this date the rules have changed. What HMRC have ruled within this is actually VAT should be charged for this service. So in my understanding, where it's just they've ruled that VAT should be charged, they're more than likely to go back. And I'm sure from your days at HMRC, Kenny, and we know that HMRC have their own targets, so they have targets for non-compliant tax that they need to recover. So I'm sure they'll be looking at this situation, thinking, well, we can go back and we've proved this. We can go back and get there's a substantial amount of VAT that should have been paid over here. So
yeah, absolutely, and it's sticking tax as well, so it's not VAT that's going to be recoverable, so it's more reason for them to do it. And that's what I said, there would have to be some sort of overriding reason not to do it.
I think from my understanding, obviously the company's named, in this case Plus Us, they are the ones that are liable for the VAT. At the minute, they should have been charging the VAT. But fundamentally, if the VAT gets retrospective, VAT needs to be paid, somebody is going to have to pay it. And I guess the NHS needs to look at, where a company is liable, do they have that money to cover that bill? And if they don't and want to carry on trading, will VAT-only invoices be raised back to the NHS, which is a risk to consider.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, that seems to be the last of the questions. That's been great having all the different questions from lots of different of the delegates, so different perspectives looking on there. Thanks for listening in this morning. If you do have any further queries, then please certainly feel free to get in touch with either Jack or myself. If you go onto our website at liaison.co.uk/events, it will give you details of any other forthcoming webinars. All it remains to say is thanks for coming along this morning, and enjoy the rest of your day. Goodbye.
Thank you.